So, in short, Bulent Rauf, born 1911 to 1987, was a man who escaped definition deliberately. And you can seriously see that in a lot of his working, but whom many varied descriptions fit easily. A gentleman by some, a mystic by some, a world-class cook by some, an archaeologist by some, a writer, a translator, a Turkish citizen and a man of the world, lover of beauty and champion of esoteric education. He was a consultant to the Beshara Trust and the Beshara School and life president of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society. It was upon his incentive that the Chislam Institute came about, and he served it as consultant until his death in 1987. John Brass said, based on Bulent, he was a man of wisdom. He refused to become anyone's teacher, came as a friend and guide, and reiterated continually that it is the reality within each person which is the teacher, and that one of the principal aims of being properly established in spiritual education is to find this out for oneself and live it. The photograph of Bulent is interesting and gives a partial and surface view of the man. For this reason, Bulent seldomly allowed his photograph to be taken. Equally, this obituary is like a photograph, giving only an imperfect impression of a complete man. So, with that being said, this whole concept on humility, there's other things we can talk about, but I think this is a good one that I wanted to recommend because what attracts me to it is how short, how weighted it is with specificity with words, and I can tell that this person didn't necessarily want to waste any of his precious time, and wanted to kind of be as clear as he possibly could with something so broad, humility. So that's a little bit about the person. I have 10 points that I got from this reading, but I want to kind of pass the baton to all of you because again, this isn't about there's no hierarchy here whatsoever. We're all trying to figure out this thing called reality, big and small R's, based on however you want to capitalize it. So what are your thoughts? Throw this back at all y'all. Even if you didn't read it, it's on humility. So tell me, what's humility? I need that. We all need humility, God willing.
I guess I'll just jump in and say some of the things that I got from it. So, I mean, guess holistically looking at what I read, I really identify with this idea of him speaking about this relationship between the ego and the extended version of the ego or the over ego or over soul. I put that word up because that's not the word he used, but just paraphrasing him talking about that relationship and how basically the ego that matures begins to recognize itself as the extension of this greater essence or this greater thing, and sort of dissolving that relationship between subject and object. He really poetically expresses as well throughout the whole discourse. That's
Yeah,
mostly for me.
Yeah, that point. What is he? Not superego. What is it that the word that he used?
Isn't or isp, IP something.
Oh, yeah, which is like the beingness.
Yeah. Do you know how to pronounce it?
Ipseity, I think.
Ipsity or ipseity?
I think it's ipseity.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what? Like it's
passion or
it's being, right? Or isness? Is that what it is?
Compassionate one or something like that?
Selfhood.
Selfhood. Yeah. Or yeah, isness, selfhood. So that's how I understand it. Yeah, one thing that the idea of becoming the nafs, the ego of it, an extension of that. Another way that really resonate with me, and I don't know if I read it from or if he said it in there or it's something that I kind of attached to it, which is Nafas ar-Rahman, the breath of the merciful. or the ego of the merciful, or the extension of the selfhood, right? The things with the Arabic phrasing, nafas al-Rahman, it's like it's the breath, the breath of the compassionate, the breath of the source, to creating this image of this ebb flow of the source, the inhalation and exhalation of the source, and being an extension of that. And there's something about it that's so subtle and delicate. It makes me feel good just to have that image, or be associated with that image, or as an extension, as a manifestation of the source in such a beautiful way. Yeah, I enjoyed that very much. And part of that, I mean, shit, I wrote a whole blog entry about what was it, that line? I dressed myself in flesh and bone and appeared as Eunice.
Yeah.
Right? I dressed myself in flesh and bone and appeared as Usama. Like that line from Eunice Emre. Yeah, like that's it. You know, which create this tension and this yeah, I guess that's a inhale, exhale kind of tension between the universal and the particular, between the source and the ego that's here, that's living and doing all this, right? And how does humility play a factor in that? Yeah, for now it feels like humility is somewhere in the middle between the two. Somewhere that allows something that creates space for more of it to emerge. It feels like emptying the cup. It feels like transcendence, or what's the word? Making the nervous system settle, like what's the word that I'm looking for? Making it sensitive. That's how it. This is the feeling of humility. This is what it feels like. It feels like it's that thing, that mechanism that empties the cup, that makes the nervous system more sensitive. That creates space for more of source to come through. Because the opposite of it says unknowingly or blindly says, I am complete. I don't need to learn no more. I have it all figured out. That's it. I'm done. I'm good. No need. So that's how, for me, that's how humility, that's how it kind of that's how it resonates within that tension between particular and universal, between that nafas al-Rahman, the breath of the merciful, the extension, the ego, that's extension of the universal ego, and the personality, that's Usama. And it's kind of still cooking, right? Because there's a lot of more subtleties in it that's like, yeah, still there's something still there that I'm still kind of working through, which is more like, what does what's the word that he used? What does self-importance, what does healthy self-importance looks like? What does healthy self-acknowledgement look like? So that it's not, also it's not blind humility. It's not. I remember one of Jay-Z's lines where he said they try to dim you down, tell you be humble. Right? There's something that also there's some kind of a negative. It can be used in a negative way, right? Sit down, be humble. Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z's like, oh, they're trying to dim your light, telling you to be humble, right? That's like when you see somebody who's like just happy, shining, like they're just, and somebody comes like, what are you smiling about? What are you happy for? Like, be humble. And there's something that's not right. Like it can be used in a negative way. So, I'm still trying to figure out what that healthy self-acknowledgement. Like, okay, you can empty whatever it is that needs to go. And I guess part of that is self-observation, right? In order to know things that don't necessarily work anymore. They don't necessarily, they're not serving. Put that in the fire. But the other stuff is like, okay, this is important. Yeah, so that's kind of the general overview for me of humility and how that came about in the writing.
I think about that. I was thinking about that as I was reading also, and what's his name? David? That's your name, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he brought up about I mean, he didn't say it in this exact way, I don't think, but about the semantics or sort of breaking through the language and stuff like that. Like, I mean, you didn't say it like that, but that's what I thought of when you said what you said about looking at the different religions and seeing where in their language they start to separate and stuff like that. And I thought about this in relationship to that word humility and how, like, exactly what you're bringing up, Osama, like some people can use that word in different ways, all sort of ways. And I imagine the translation of this, the original, or the original writing of this was in probably another language, and they translated it, and whoever was the translator found the best possible words. But anyway, all that is to say, when I used to think of humility, right, it just occurred to me, or it occurred to me then as people having to like force a posture on themselves with their mind to try to be. When I thought of humility, it sort of always existed in my head as like a false humility, like someone trying to impose a mood or posture on their behavior or mind in order to garner a certain reaction from the environment, or maybe an inner pat on the back, like, oh, I'm being the bigger person. Let me, you know what I mean? But as I begin to experience more and more things, I guess, and I don't know if I heard it from one of you guys or whether it was something I heard here about the imagery of humility, sort of like how when a tree starts to blossom and it's that branch starts to give fruit, naturally that the weight of the fruit that it has to offer will begin to bow, in acknowledgement of the weight or the gravitas of the fruit that tree is bearing, bowing from a state of being, of having something to offer, or being completely fulfilled in what it is, which is a completely different state than someone trying to impose an intellectual way of being on themselves in order to fit a certain mold that says, I'm humble or I'm spiritual. You know what I mean? It's almost as if the word humility, the way I'm learning it to be, is a natural byproduct of blossoming or growing in your fulfillment. Like a flower doesn't have to be humble, it's just being what it is, and it's not having to think about it. The ego, or I should say the immature ego, or the personality, is not imposing something on it in order for it to appear a certain way or to create a psychological reaction in a certain way. It's just being. And as a result, onlookers might say, oh, that person is humble, or that is humility, or that is this. But really, they're looking from a, a POV and trying to attach a label onto a state, but when they attach it, it's like oh, this person is being this. Or they had to work on that and change their mind to be that. When really, possibly, uh, a state emerged, and that's just what it looks like. I talked for a long time, but I hope it wasn't all over the place.
Um, yeah, so like, going off of what Osama said and then Antoine, so backing up a little bit, it seems like within the context of what the writer is saying is humility is like a state of receptivity rather than, as you were just pointing out, this forceful performance of standards, right? Where this, and I believe, I mean, this is dense. It's like I could read this a number of times, and there's a lot of stuff that starts kind of coming out. And he's having two different conversations at the same time. One is a very sort of positively oriented conversation, and another one is quite negative with regards to the problem of a lack of humility, or just like the nafs, like this sort of like will to assert against what is, the nafs al-Rahman, which is this sort of like ebb and flow of things. And if you can sort of find yourself in this state of, he kind of uses the word here of like clarity, to sort of be this state of like utmost humility where you're just like optimally receptive at that point. There's no longer the branch isn't trying to hold the fruit up. It's just going with it, right? The flower just goes towards the sun. It doesn't like, no, I want to go over here. I want to go. No, I don't want to do that. I want to be blue today or whatever. It's just the natural expression as that sort of extends from the source. I don't know the exact quote in the Quran, but I remember this very distinctly, where they're talking about the difference between humans and all other beings, and that all other beings are just naturally submissive, right? All animals, plants, and everything, they are in a constant state of Islam. Whereas humans, they have to make this choice, right? They can like sort of fight against it, or they can sort of give into it, and be completely submissive. But in this, so you can take that statement in two different ways. Submissive to what, right? Submissive to the written laws, and the religious police come around and tell you, oh no, you're not bowing enough, or you weren't humble enough, or something, or submissive just to like the divine breath, that's just going in and out of everything. so that's kind of what like came up in my mind, was that little sort of section, which always fascinated me for years. And I always think about, oh, the difference between me and my cat is my cat just like does his catness perfectly. There's no argument there, right? Whereas me, I'm like oh, should I be this? Should I be this? Should I do this thing? Oh, but it'd be better if I do this, you know? And so that's like the other part of what I'm seeing in this document, where it's like there's this constant, you know, dialogue in the brain of like, oh, now I'm being humble. Oh, how good I am. I was humble, you know? And like, I don't need to be humble anymore because I've been humble. And so you like take one step forward, three steps back. And that's sort of like the trick of the ego, is that the ego, even in doing good things, the ego can be damaging, right? Because you're like inflating yourself through doing what's prescribed as good, but it's still like creating this sense of like pride and a lack of receptivity. And you start to build this notion of like, well, since I do this thing, I know it's right and wrong. And then someone else comes along with maybe a slightly different perspective and, oh, have you considered this? And you're like, no, right? Like, I know what I'm doing because I've been doing the things that I've been told are good. And I've been doing those like assiduously, nonstop. Even in those times when I wanted to not do them, I did do those things. Now my pride's even bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So it's like every step we take in a good direction, our pride just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we become less receptive. Yeah, I don't know where else I'm going with that, but that's kind of like what I was picking up in the reading, and then like what you guys were talking about too.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. That's absolutely beautiful. And yeah, that is something that you just brought up about um you know, all beings are in a state of glorifying the source, right? I never thought of it as a form of humility, but it is, right? It's like um they're in a constant state of being. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Constant way of being. And to go back to the point that, you know, both of you were making, which is, how does it, so there's a state, there's a state of being, right, that one can taste, feel, enter, or it enters us. Now, if that humility being a byproduct, right, of that state, I understand, right? Now, I think in the document also he was talking about how humility can also be a practice, meaning if we're not naturally inclined towards it, if our conditioning, if our upbringing, if our culture, whatever it is, all these things that growing up kind of start to pile up on our personality, um, meaning it's not becoming an actual natural byproduct of our beingness, then he's suggesting it becomes a practice. So one has to become familiar with it again, right? Familiar with humility. And that's the trap that you just mentioned, David, which is, okay, now it becomes a practice, meaning now there's some kind of a progress mark. There's some kind of I was here when I started, now I'm here. Good job. Right? It's like, it's counterintuitive. So what is that about? Can it be can it be a practice? Can humility actually be a practice? Or is it more efficient? I don't know if more efficient. Like, is it like, hey, I'm not even gonna worry about whether I'm in a constant, whether I'm humble or not. I'm not even worried about this or that. I'm just going in I mean, even that going in requires a level of humility, right? Because the question already starting with, I don't know who I am. I think even just asking that question, one must have some kind of state of humbleness or humility to say, who am I? That being the call. So, but can it be a practice? Can humility be a practice?
My vote is that it certainly can be a practice, but not a practice that gets you to that state. No, I shouldn't generalize like that, right? Because if that state is absolutely everywhere and everything, then you can enter it from any point. But I think as a practice like, oh, I'm being humble and it's going to garner me this spiritual experience, or I'm going to have more being inside me because I let this person go ahead of me, or I let this person speak first, or whatever our examples is of humility. I think it could become a mind fuck. Now someone has these practices, and now they think, oh, I'm this now because I've I've refined and mastered this skill of humility, or whatever skill it might be. And I just think that might be the mistake of the intellect, constantly playing on itself. Whether it's doing a practice and like that and thinking it's going to gain you this, and this is the formula for this thing to allow more beingness to come inside of me. While I think it is possible, I just feel like it's not still probable that, you know, this mind psychological game is going to get someone into that state in a lived way, or allow their ego to mature to such a state where it is knowing itself as being. It might just become the immature ego getting stronger and stronger because, oh, I've mastered these practices and I know this much spiritual knowledge. I can rattle off things about the Quran and about da 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 da, and I listen to my parents, da 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 da, and this could all be some intellectual, psychological gymnastics, and this person is completely lacking the experience. One thing, though, that we talked about earlier, and with all that said, anything's possible. But one thing we talked about earlier is, like, I think key entry points into that state that will allow humility and a whole bunch of other attributes that this beingness holds to be established is things like transcending the intellectual gymnastics, but of course your mind has to point somewhere and start somewhere in order to go in a certain direction. But as long as it's never calling the model or the path, the destination or the state. You know what I mean? Like it, because oftentimes when we're reading, and when I was reading this too, I could see the state enmeshing with the path in the languaging. But I could also, this is my projection, this is what I thought, I could see that whoever had written this original document had these experiences, was established in a state. But in translation, the person who's translating it is translating an experience that they possibly did not necessarily have. So the wording that they chose for certain things is still pointing at that state, but in certain places, which I didn't highlight, is meshing sort of the path and the state together, in my opinion. But with all that said, my last comment would be entries into allowing, like the greater practice would be someone's art or whatever their passion is that will gain an entry point into that state, or whether it's things like meditation or singing, whatever is that tool that allows the mind or the activity to transcend itself. So where this intellectual back and forth is not becoming a prison, can be an entry point into that state. And if that art is practiced over and over again, getting into that zone or that flow state with their painting or their drawing or their music, then that state will be cultivated in the physiology and will become at home, and it will express what the book is pointing to, in my opinion.
So if I may ask, like, do you think that's applicable to say like flow states, right? When like an athlete's just like in the zone, or like an artist is just painting beyond good and bad, right? They're just doing.
100%.
I mean, that's I think that's what you're also pointing at, Antoine, here, is that this meshing between the path and the destination, because sometimes the path and some part of, let's say, some spiritual traditions would make a practice out of depriving the ego, right? So they would go through fasting, they would go through silence. I mean, obviously stillness also, that's part of it, and it's in the hopes that we can starve the ego in such a way that it can create enough space so one can observe it, right? But the other way around it also is what you're saying, what you're calling is this transcendence, or refining the nervous system, as now more and more people are calling it, or music and art and such, where the state of the experience of struggle as a self-imposed struggle may not be necessary in order to establish that.
In my opinion, absolutely, bro. In fact, I would even go further to say that the first example that you even described, like the fasting and stuff like that, it would look like to someone who who's looking from the outside, like, oh, this person is fasting, they're depriving their ego, they're trying to, and from the outside looking at it objectively, that's what's happening. Like, yo, why are you doing that? Like, why are you not eating? Like, why are you trying not to have sex or masturbate, or why are you doing those things? And it's looking from the outside like this person is like trying to kill their ego or do it. But actually, depending on where this person is in their process, it's not being experienced as a deprivation. It's the same thing as when this basketball player is in that zone and they just can't miss, or when that singer is raptured up. The water fast, these things create that same thing. But for, let's say, disciples looking in at, let's say, their teacher or whoever, they're thinking, whoa, this is austerity, this is discipline. When really, that person, I can't say this for everybody, but oftentimes this person who's experiencing this water fasting or something, depending on the state that their physiology is in when they begin, they're gonna go through some shit. But if their physiology, if they already been practicing it and they've already been sort of raptured up, this experience is like a when I say practice, I don't mean like routine, but I mean experiencing their physiology has been cultivated for it. This experience is like a rapture up. It's like you're in flow state, you're in zone. It's not occurring as disciplined. It's not. It's, if anything, is occurring as a compulsion of devotion. Like
Yep.
you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's equanimity, right? It's not a like, this is good, this is bad. It's just doing, just in that state. And and so it's kind of like, to go back on the practice of humility, it's kind of like this fake it till you make it, right? Where you're just kind of like doing it, and you're like, all right, and you go through this period of like, oh, is this gonna get me somewhere? And then it's like, why am I doing this? This is so stupid, like wasting my time. And a lot of people will stop, at those points, and then, but another person might not. And they just kind of keep going, and you're sort of like, all of those conversations are like breaking through layers and layers and layers of of receptivity, right? You're like, here's the next layer of me not being receptive. Oh, here's the next one. Oh, now I'm being receptive. Oh, wait a second. Now there's another. And it's kind of this like ongoing process, and then it kind of becomes that like scale for you to like add, like, this is where it really requires really, serious honesty with yourself, where it's like, am I getting caught up in this? Am I like inflating myself with this? Do I feel like I'm being, like, oh, let me try a different way? It's almost like the Malamatia, right? The way of blame, where it's like constantly looking for these things that they're doing that they can then sort of like flip to try and like really shake up their attachment to things. And it's like as soon as a fakir realizes they take pride in wearing rags, they need to go dress like a rich guy, and walk. Oh, I thought you were a fakir, like, very famous, noble, homeless person wandering. All of a sudden, you're wearing all these jewels. What happened to you? You lost your spirituality? Then, oh, your ego's really gonna be cut. That. So it's just this constant like, yeah, I mean, that's the practice of humility. It's like constantly sort of like, not just constantly finding pride. Oh, I'm accomplishing. It's more like, when am I gonna fail totally? Where my sense of self is just like, I give up. Boom, it's gone. There's in Vajrayana Buddhism, there's a practice they do called Rushen, and what it means is to separate between the primordially pure aspect of awareness and sort of regular mind, the intellect or ego. And so they do these practices, which are like, can be kind of seem a little crazy, to like outside observers. So they go do them in very private settings, things where like they have to like acting like hell beings or vicious animals. And in that process, a lot of stuff comes up. They're really shaking themselves up, and they do that to the point of exhaustion, to the point where they just break, and then that's when they focus. What broke, and what's left? What remains when myself just couldn't resist any further? When I just gave up. Oh, you're gonna keep doing it because your teacher's like sitting there with a stick ready to get you, and I'm gonna keep doing this thing until you just completely exhaust. And then they'll even do that with like physical postures, where they have to stand in these really difficult physical postures until they completely collapse. And it's at that point of collapse when they just let go, and you get this glimpse of complete clarity. And then your mind comes back, oh, look, I just had that experience. Ooh, wow, that's exciting. But like, you have this thing, it's almost like a little door that starts to open, a little hole, and you can sort of peek through, and then little by little you widen that hole. But that's also something that just naturally occurs with us all the time, whether you're just walking down the street or you're playing basketball. It's just we're not trained to recognize it as this like point of purity. It's just clarity, just total clarity. And you're just, everything's perfect in that state. It's not like good, bad. It's just totally even, you know? And then the mind kicks in.
Yeah, that's awesome. That reminded me, man, that's beautiful. Um, that reminded me of Rumi's line where he says, "Ruin your reputation," right? Like a conscious, it's almost like a Milamatiya way, right? Like the blameworthy way. Ruin your reputation. Always going for that ultimate failure. Kind of what you said. I love that. I love that line. It's like, yeah, there's definitely humility in that because, and that's the thing about the arts. Kind of putting that in is that humility says, I need somebody to teach me the next technique or an instrument or something. Like the next step. That's the thing in the arts is that, which is similar as a structure, similar to spiritual traditions, that you would have a teacher and a student, a teacher and a student, a master and a and a student. And that student has to be willing to fail constantly in order to learn, in order to progress, even in sports, right? Like it's the same thing. Oh, I need a good coach. We can say, oh, I'm gonna do it by myself. I'm gonna watch as many YouTube videos as possible. I'm gonna, I'm gonna do as much as possible by myself. And it is possible, right? Um, and yet there is a point where even if it's not just an actual relationship between a student and a teacher, but then people become your teachers. This is what that receptivity that you were talking about, David, is like when everybody becomes your teacher, when every meeting it's like, ooh, this is kind of another thing where they say treat everybody that you meet as the khidr, the green man, the green spirit, right? Treat everybody that you meet as Jesus Christ. Everybody is Buddha, right? Everybody becomes your teacher in that way. And ultimately this humility is a state of this need. I don't know, need is I'm using that for lack of a better word, for the source, right? There's this reliance on the source, on it, right? That's that being receptive to source, to that life force, to say, hey, in reality, this little I can't do it on its own. I mean, that's now, especially now, we feel that more, right? Like, I don't know how to make a shirt like this. I don't know how to, whatever, all the food, the cars, the technology that we're using, everything that we're using we're reliant on an entire system that we're not conscious of, we're not aware of, or sometimes we become aware of and then kind of just fleet. And then on like just even on the body, on this reality, on the fact that one can breathe. And I guess that's the difference when humility becomes an actual state, when it becomes that meshment with the being itself, where it's just kind of becomes one. It's no longer a practice. It's no longer, you know, a door or a pointing towards. It becomes one with that being. And until then, this constant, I'm gonna, you know, keep going. Until then, this is what's happening. Yeah, man, thank you for bringing those examples and yeah, the examples about the Buddhist exercises or practices. That painted some kind of image. It's like, ooh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. Yeah.
I mean, if we could go back a little bit to the idea of healthy humility too, I think that's like, you know, because it's like good to think big picture, but also like we have to deal with the mundane. And you know, a lot of people get really screwed up by spiritual teachers because they don't have healthy humility, you know. And it's like really hard to to actually have trust too, because that kind of thing happens so often. And you know, I was thinking about like that example you gave, you know, like people like someone who's like shining, and then someone's like, oh, yo, you need to be more humble, you know. And you know, I've received that, and at times I'll be like, "What are you talking about?" But at other times I'm like, "Oh, damn," you know, like, yeah, I shine too much. I should have kept my mouth shut, whatever. And in both cases, it was a lack of receptivity for both parties, right? And I think that's what's really important to recognize is that when someone criticizes you, it's really important that you're able to be aware if they themselves are in lack of humility, right? Are they not able to deal with your shine? And that doesn't make them bad, or, you know, but it would definitely help how you approach and deal with them. If you're able to be aware of the fact, like, okay, you know, it's a little too much. I shook something in them or triggered something, you know, it's not me, it's them. But for some reason, I'm giving them a bad vibe or something. You know what I mean? And so, how do I like negotiate that? Because you know, I mean, yeah, enlightenment, that's a big thing, but like also relationships are really important. You know, like you can't just be a sort of like blitzed out person, like you know, constantly walking around, you know, doing things to like ruin your image so that you can transcend your ego, you know, like that's gonna like create a lot of havoc. I mean, some guys do it, but they're known as crazy, you know, although that guy, you know, until they have special powers and then people, oh, let's go pray to them, you know. But yeah, that's a big thing for me, like, and especially with a lot of these spiritual teachers, you know, and 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 even ones that have demonstrated like serious progress on the path, and then all of a sudden they get caught on something, and then all, you know, and they like to like sort of knock down students, you know, ah, oh, it's my job to crush their ego. And but to what extent are you actually creating trauma and then pulling them back further from the path, you know? Because that's very easy to happen. And especially if you're trying to be humble as a student and you're receiving this information, which is making your voice say, yeah, I don't know if this is right, but I want to be humble. So I'm going to just take it. And, you know, that's a real, like, sort of rocky road, I think.
Facts.
100% facts.
Facts.
No, I think you can even take it farther back. There's a point that David you shared, and then Osama shared something, Antoine too, and I was trying to give space for the beautiful, and I'm so happy that I did because y'all expressed so much beauty. But I certainly missed a lot of things, so I'm going to go forward and backwards at the same time to see what I have to say because a lot of these things were really powerful for me. Um, I was trying my best to write down my thoughts and not stop people from just flowing because there's, again, so much beauty. But it reminded me to the little bit that I know of Bulent. He loved to cook. And when the stories go, when he would cook, he would treat that as such a practice with students and people from all walks of life and really just enjoy the alchemical process of combining this ingredient and that ingredient, this ingredient and that ingredient to change palates and tastes and the flavors. Where on one hand, you can just look at it as a bunch of atoms swimming in the stew of this, this place called Earth. But on the other, they're still different, even though they're the same. So from our vantage point, unity sounds amazing, but let's honor the multiplicity of this world. And that reminded me of Bennett's, J.G. Bennett's last book, which I think is his memoir, and I haven't read it. I have it on my shelf somewhere. And the profession that I'm in, it's something that I hope to always, to a degree, wear it with a level of high ethical value. And it's essentially written out as I teach how to cook, but never not what to cook or not what to cook. And there's an art, and you guys all talked about the art. The in the profession that I'm in, I don't look at things as good or bad or right and wrong. And certainly sometimes I do, because there's many moments where ethically for the safety of other people, I have to make a decision and say that's not the best thing to do at this moment. And we were talking about triage on our calls and certainly on one of the last calls too. But I'm going to focus on the word art, and I'm going to use cooking as an example. The art of cooking, if that's the most matured state that somebody that wants to play with cooking can be, it exuberates this level of creativity and expression in such a profound way. The development or the matured state of that could be the practice of cooking, the practice of cooking. And that could be where the skills are built, where there's growth and this up and down flow. And then the immatured version, again, just having to use this word, not good or bad or happy or sad, the task of cooking would be more routine and out of the necessity's sake of something. All the practices that I think many people do in this life can be really blotted down. Practices, I mean, spiritual could be just aggression or even acts of violence. There's immaturity and then there's a matured version of it on all scales. What is the alchemical process that one needs to do to mature it? And then that led me to the whole cat example when you said it. You have a cat, David? Is that why you use that example? It's like I look at my cat, and the cat is just being a cat. This lifetime, I haven't had the privilege or possibly the disappointment of being a cat. So I don't know either how it is to be a cat, privilege or the disappointment. But how beautiful from your perspective at the state that you're in, you see the cat effortlessly being the beautiful cat. But in my mind, I was like, man, maybe there's a cat in the neighborhood who looks at your cat as that's a dysfunctional fucking cat right there. What the fuck is this cat doing? Why can't it just be a fucking cat already? Why can't it perfect itself? So if I transcend for a moment in a state of meditation, whether it be by my faith, my spirituality, my practice in nothingness, or whatever it happens to be, anything, listening to music, walking in a park, holding the hand of my partner that I dearly love, from the highest possible state of transcendence, is there something looking down at me and saying, this all is perfect? Yet I'm here thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? What this thing is crazy. I don't know how to operate. I need to do more of this or less of this. I want to understand. But from a higher state of observation looking down, or looking, not even want to say down or up, something may see this thing as perfect. And I don't even want to use that word. And I wrote about that today, which is funny that I'm talking about it today again in the morning. And then it leads me to the point of what somebody really special to me in my life used to always say something, um, transcend and include, transcend and include. Not one, not the other. Transcend and include. And I didn't understand. Still am learning and figuring it out what that essentially means. And as I'm hearing the expressions on tonight's call, I'm almost imagining, as you guys are expressing, this rocket ship and the pieces of this rocket ship. I'm going to call it intellect, I'm going to call it physicality, and I'm going to call it emotions. They all stitch together the makings of this ship. What's inside of that ship, in order for it to ascend, is this level of inclusion. Like it's piecing it all together, and that's giving it this a lift off to essentially transcend to a higher state. Not negating, it's all still there, but it's propelling it up to essentially see things from a more mature state of observation. So I'm going to use this word, God willing. How different would it be for me tomorrow? And I'd probably do this as a meditation tonight. How did, if the thing I think that is above me, and I'm only using the word just semantically here, above, is looking down at me, how is it observing me? Is it observing me as beautiful as David observes this cat? This cat is just perfect being a cat. I don't know. I don't speak cat. Who knows? And going back to Bulent's work, this last point here about humility is ah, in that state of transcendence, realization transcends intellect to me. Not one, bad or good or bad or happy or sad. Realization, it transcends the intellect in so many ways. In moments where I find somebody who, and I don't know, because this is a judgment on my end, so it's a subjective judgment here, where I see them kind of walking their truth, however that may look like, they're almost in this state of realization. Now, it could be really dumbfounded or it can be really profound, but there's this level of realization that's happening there, some form of realization. But ultimately, what I really do feel that's being pointed here for me, is awareness and the objectivity of pointing at something through the lens of awareness. And I get it. For me, it is so hard. A few days ago, I believe I was maybe talking with Osama, or maybe in a session that I was having. I said many moments in the beginning when I'm getting riled up, it's a very subjective, really hard experience for me to kind of go through. And then eventually it starts to kind of shift rather than it being me, me, me. How is it me relating to the relationships or the others? And then eventually, something that's taking me 36 years to get to this point, and I don't even know if I'm there, to objectively pull myself out and actually look at the scenario. Now, can humility give me a door to be there a little bit faster? I mean, I don't have forever. I mean, I'm in this form. Maybe I'm in this form forever. I don't know. But is humility the key to unveil this level of divine unity in the multiplicity of this world? I am me, I'm this computer, there's books behind my shelf. I'm seeing you guys all on this call. Does humility give me the glasses to see throughout this multiplicity oneness? And can I be aware of that? Because it seems to be that awareness in many of the traditions um, almost is this level of spiritual. And I hate saying this because it's probably needs more of an hour long plus definition with references. A spiritual evolution is constant awareness of the divine nature of this whole thing. Is that the delicate balance fueled once the door is opened through humility? Is that what allows us to live this non-individuated states of consciousness that a lot of us talk about moment to moment? I don't know, but it's beautiful. And maybe tonight I'll see myself the way that you look at your cat as complete, my complete Ibrahimness or whatever the heck I am, you know. But it was profound. What a good riddle that you said. Truly, it's beautiful. I'm glad that was recorded because I'll completely forget everything that I just said. Anything else? Anybody? Because I know we're running. I don't want to cut us off or anything like that, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time.
I would just take it back, like the question you're asking, like
Sure.
in terms of being observed. Just if I would go back to Eunice's quote, where it's, "I wrap myself in flesh and bones and appear as Eunice."
Mm-hmm.
So if we take that, like you're not being observed, you're observing. So you're a channel through which something is observing, right? And 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 then to go to like an argument, a perfect description where it's like you have this very subjective like experience, you're like closed in, oh, they're not hearing me, they're not understanding me. And then if you have humility at some point in argument, which hopefully you do, and that's usually how arguments come to a close, is you have become receptive to their perspective. And in that case, you're observing through their eyes for a moment what's going on. And you're seeing what you did, right? And there's a little bit of shame that happens, which is good because that kind of like quells things a little bit more. I mean, toxic shame, no, but like, oh goodness, I've been so like just me, and like completely ignoring their situation. And that moment, and for me, I believe, is a point of unity where it's like all of a sudden you've realized the potentiality of experiences just beyond you. And you all of a sudden are experiencing what they're experiencing. I mean, it's still a little subjective, but it changes things, right?
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. And way to wrap it up with the with the poem, right? And way to wrap it up is that, yeah, that's there isn't something else that's observing. I think that's what it's doing. It's like giving this space to say, I can observe it. Therefore, it's not me. I'm observing it. I can't be that, which I observe. Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a great call.
Yeah, we're glad you made it, David.
I'm so glad I came,
Yeah,
guys.
absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, how do we close this? Man, it feels like it's a
I think it's continuation, no clothes. I mean,
yeah,
it was a great point. And again, I'm so happy that this was recorded because you guys were going in, like sharing some really profound perspectives. So I'm happy to kind of look back, and with Fathom, it kind of summarizes it. So I'm interested to see how it kind of breaks down what the heck we were all talking, like trying to point to. But for some reason, I'm under the impression that I think we're all pointing to the same something of deep similarity. But oh, it was beautiful.
absolutely.
David, I appreciate you so much, man. Like your contributions.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. Somehow I talk too much.
Oh, no.
Not at all.
Oh, you were perfect, bro.
Oh, well, thank you. It was really a pleasure to hang out and listen to you guys and share and be receptive. And yeah.
Please, yeah, we do this once a month. August, I expect less people anyway with all travels and stuff like that in the holidays, and then hopefully in September you come through, you'll meet a few of the other people. And it is funny because most of these people are artists some way, somehow. Like everybody
Yeah.
has some form of expression artistically, and it'll be beautiful.
So
Wow.
when is the next one?
September 25th.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll send the emails, and I'll also include in that email the WhatsApp group, so that hopefully we can all get get together and maybe share some of those insights, because I know like we can talk about this, and it can take many different forms in many different directions. Um, and probably WhatsApp is the easiest way to share little snippets of insights here and there. I know the part of these practices that were shared in the PDF, like the self-examination exercise, the um, practical exercise and contemplative activity. I think some of those would be beneficial to share insights, maybe on a WhatsApp group. So I'll share that info also in the email, and hopefully we can get that started